everyone, to today's webinar, How Healthcare Organizations Can Seize the Generative AI Opportunity. On behalf of Becker's Healthcare, thanks for joining us today. Before we begin, I'm going to walk you through a few quick housekeeping instructions. If at any time you have trouble with the video or the audio, try refreshing your browser. But if that doesn't fix it, or you're having other issues, feel free to pop those into the chat. We're here to help. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the QA box you see on your screen. And all submitted questions will be shared with our sponsor following the presentation. With that, I'm pleased to welcome today's speakers, Ariel Trzynski, Principal Analyst at Forrester, and Anita Mann, Global Head of Healthcare at EXL. Thank you so much, Ariel and Anita, for being here. I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. I guess we can go to the title slide. I'm Anita Mann. I've been with EXL about 5 years now, and I'm privileged to work with over 10,000 healthcare colleagues around the globe, and very happy to be here today. First, I do want to thank Forrester and Becker's for their partnership in being able to bring this event to you. And I certainly want to thank everyone who participated in the research and everyone who has come together today for this conversation. We will really love it if you can share your questions in the Q&A box as we're going through, so that when we get to that part of our agenda here at the end, we can have a really nice, rich dialogue. And Ariel, our expert here today from Forrester, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Anita, and thank you again to you and to the whole EXL team and to the Becker's crew for having us here. I'm so honored to be part of this research and be able to share more of the findings with you all. I'm Ariel Trzynski, a principal analyst here at Forrester. I am dedicated to our healthcare vertical, so that means that I have the pleasure of working with many health insurer and provider clients across various geographies, but predominantly within the US. So I'm excited to not only share the findings of this study, but also bring forward some of the larger macro trends that we see across our research. And so with that, let's dig in to more about the study. I want to give a bit of context and background for folks before we jump into the data and share more of these exciting insights. So to give some background, EXL commissioned this study, and it was conducted by Forrester Consulting. We looked at the state of generative AI readiness among healthcare payers. Specifically, we were focused on those within the US. We heard mostly from mid to large size firms. Most of the folks that we heard from and the responses you'll see are representative of folks that cover at least 100,000 lives. We also heard from 150 different individuals. We were specifically focused on folks that had a level of influence within their organization and their strategy on generative AI. These spanned from director level all the way up to the C-suite, and they worked across multiple different areas, which I think provided some richness to the responses. So we heard from folks in IT and digital experience, but also some folks in risk. And so I think that provides a really interesting perspective as we look across the different goals that these folks had. So we'll be talking about level of investment. We'll talk about some of their goals for this year and the next year. We'll talk about use cases. We'll talk about implementation, some challenges, some upsides, and then we'll talk about what is still needed to succeed as we think about the path forward. So with that, let's talk first about where folks are as we think about the broader state of generative AI within healthcare. We do continue to see that many healthcare leaders are placing a lot of hope in generative AI, which is very exciting, right? It's this emerging, exciting technology, and it continues to get better and faster and more exciting every day. That said, we still see many healthcare organizations facing challenges. So we know that folks are facing myriad challenges, whether it is rising medical utilization and cost on the payer side. It's thinking about the future coming year. It's thinking about a pending election, an uncertain regulatory environment, and then also certainly thinking about, amid some of these financial struggles, how do we find efficiency? How do we find a way of doing more with less is something that we continue to hear in many of these responses. Separately, but related, we still continue to hear that healthcare organizations are trying to find that competitive edge. They're thinking about things like brand differentiation. They are concerned about consolidation. They're concerned about new disruptors that are coming into this space and testing out new business models. And so, again, generative AI as a technology can help bring some hope and bring promise to many of these challenges. We have to find ways of empowering employees to be able to do that more with less, to be able to have answers faster than ever before. And so as we jump into the data, again, we heard this loud and clear. For me, one of the best ways to understand where folks are focused and what their plans are for the future is to follow the money. And so when we look at this, more than 3/4 of respondents say that implementing generative AI is a high priority for their organization this year. Furthermore, they're looking to back those priorities with increased spending. We heard that more than 2/3 indicated that their organization will increase its investment in generative AI capabilities over the next 2 years. And 1/3 are planning to increase that spending by more than 50% over the current levels. So that juxtaposition of financial struggle, right, and needing to find operational efficiency, but we're going to continue to invest more dollars in this technology, to me provides a really strong signal that they see generative AI as holding a lot of promise and power for their organization moving forward. I know, Anita, you have customers coming to you with some of these challenges. What are you hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. Ariel, one thing I wanted to share is that the cost pressure that you talked about is really being felt all throughout the different lines of business inside a payer organization. Medicaid redeterminations happened, mostly completing now. And not only did that mean the scale of the operation, the covered population was coming down, but often it meant the healthier members of that population, the less, who had less utilization, came out of that risk pool. And then with Medicare Advantage, of course, we've seen they're kind of getting hit on both ends as we're transitioning into that version 28 rate model. And then at the same time, the STARS methodology kind of tightening up the way that it deals with outliers, and then making it even more difficult to maintain or improve your STARS ratings. And then even on the commercial side, believe it or not, family premiums are now exceeding $25,000 a year. But most employers are no longer able to deal with these increases through cost shifting. It's just become too burdensome on their employees. And of course, we've all heard about the increased prescription drug spend with GLP-1 drugs and others. And costs are forecasted to continue to rise in 2025. So I think one of the reasons there is so much enthusiasm for generative AI is that these market pressures are not going to alleviate on their own anytime soon. So looking at, as you said, a competitive edge through improved and differentiated and personalized member experience and outcomes is a priority that we're hearing across the board, as well as how do we contain the growth in medical cost and transform our administrative activities to really shift work upstream and look to avoid or eliminate some of those activities and cost drivers over the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many challenges that you just listed off there, right? It can be daunting. So you are facing, this, mountain of challenges. And I love the examples there that you talked about, and thinking about how do we use this technology for good, right? And being able to still be able to achieve our goals. Because even though we have this laundry list of challenges, we still have some really big strategic goals that we see many payers trying to accomplish in the coming year. And so I want to double click on some of those as well and talk about maybe this sort of interesting side by side, right, that we heard in the study. And so when we clicked into trying to understand what are their top goals, right, for this coming year, amid all of these challenges, we know that it's still imperative for folks to be able to improve the member experience, right, to your point, whether that's Medicare Advantage or it is the commercial line of business. We continue to see rising medical utilization. We also continue to see costs going up right now, mainly for employers. At some point, we expect it to trickle down to employees as well. And so, how can they be better informed to think about how they manage their own health and think about their own utilization? So, number one, member experience, right, fall closely behind by the ability to improve customer data and security amid increasing cyber attacks, ransomware. We continue to see this being a key focus for many folks. And then, of course, boosting operational efficiency, which we've touched on already. So again, all of these things support that macro narrative of challenging landscape that we see for many payers and that need to do more with less. I want to call out, one note about the member experience. At Forrester, we also report on the CX index for health insurers. And this is an area that unfortunately we've continued to see a decline. Year over year, more specifically this past year, we saw a statistically significant decline from last year. And we're now seeing, this rising expectations from consumers having a profound impact on the way that they engage with their health insurer. So now, when consumers have an issue and they have a question and they reach out to their health insurer, one of the key drivers that used to be there was the ability to resolve an issue quickly. This year it flipped to I need an answer the first time I reach out, whether that is digitally, it's hybrid, or it's over the phone. And so it's no longer enough to just have an answer fast. You have to do it in that first touch point, right? That moment that someone is reaching out. They've set aside the time. They want you to value their time. And so that means that you have to empower employees with more information and making sure that they can answer that question within that initial outreach. One of the other things I want to call out here is that there was disconnect for us. And this is highlighted on the slide, the exclamation mark, right? That almost, gives a warning of caution. And so, what was interesting, here is that just 19% of respondents want to enhance their ability to generate insights from customer data. I want to call it again, if your top goal is to improve the member experience, that means that you need to understand what members need, what they expect, and be able to better anticipate what comes next. We have to shift from transactional interactions to ones that create value with our customers and that deliver insights that they can then use to enrich their health, take better action. And so it's super important that we don't lose that connection. And that was something, again, that stood out, for us as we were looking at this data. I also just want to call out it's important to not operationalize customer experience without that solid foundation, right? Don't, go off and say, I have a hammer, right? Where's the nail that I can hit with this new technology? It's so important to ensure that we have those deep understanding and insights about our customers, who they are, what they need, and we continue to allow that understanding to evolve over time. So don't let that be a blind spot for your organization. Now that we've talked about some of the goals and the investments, I want to double click into some of the use cases. So what we hear from folks, we ask them about both their current state for use cases as well as what they expect to do in the future, where they're looking to expand. We know that healthcare leaders are hoping that generative AI will relieve some of the pressure, right, that they are feeling that we talked about. What's interesting here is the focus on things that are member facing. There's member and provider focus is the number one area where they're looking to currently experiment, but also expand. But then there's also this focus on more process oriented, things like claims, prior authorization, care recommendations. Again, thinking about proper utilization or appropriate utilization of care and making sure that we are making the right recommendations. This is an area where, it's been, I think, a bit contentious, across the industry. We talk about prior authorization. It's an area where we have to find speed, right? An appropriate use of things like generative AI and other technologies to be able to make sure we can tighten the turnaround window. We have new mandates that are coming. Consumers need to be able to get to their procedures or medications in a timely manner. And so it all comes back to ensuring that we improve not only the member experience, but also member outcomes. And so this is an area that we do see, generative AI, where there's an opportunity to continue to think about some of the training and some of the additional areas of consideration that we'll talk about further as we get further into the data. So I want to take a step back here, and we've talked about many of the investment areas, the goals, the use cases. There's a number of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunity. As we think about applying generative AI more broadly across the strategy, it's incredibly important that we're intentional about how we apply it, thinking about the use cases where we're going to start or expand, but also, generative AI in and of itself as a technology is in its infancy, right? We are just scratching the surface on the value that it can deliver, but that also means that it's so incredibly important to get started and think about, how do you just start learning as an organization? Where can we be applying it to be able to start generating this value? So with that, let's talk a bit more about some of the implementation learnings that other folks have been able to experience if you as an organization find that you're not quite at that experimentation mode quite yet. So when we think about the challenges of setting an intentional strategy for generative AI, one of the key things that plays a role is the lack of maturity. Again, it's in its infancy. We're still learning, and it does play a key role in both strategy development, where we heard from respondents that nearly 2/3 agree setting a long-term strategy in a space that is evolving quickly is incredibly challenging. If you are trying to build a plane and fly it at the same time, right, we can all imagine that's difficult. And so this is an area where there needs to be some flexibility, but also some willingness to jump in and start testing, right, where it's appropriate, and experimenting where it's appropriate. What this also helps us understand is that many organizations still have that sort of short-term experimentation in mind, rather than thinking about how they can implement that broader strategic vision for generative AI. Beyond that, there are other headwinds, like data. We'll spend some time talking about data. There's also an uncertain regulatory environment that we see across both at the state level as well as the national level. We've also seen it in other areas outside of the US. And of course, there is a need to increase trust from employees. So while we see these headwinds, I just want to call out that it is not forever. And many of your competitors, if you're not already down this path, are already started on this journey, and they're already starting to experiment with generative AI and being able to garner some of these learnings for their specific organizations. So it is important that you are deliberate, but it's also important that you start moving. One of those areas that I mentioned that is a key headwind is data. This was, we heard this overwhelmingly within the responses as well. So data, the way I think about it is this make or break element of your generative AI strategy. And it can create a bit of a paradox, right? It's necessary to be able to feed these enterprise generative AI use cases. We have to think about the data model, what exists today, but also what we need in the future. We also see that data and privacy can be a critical element that holds folks back from generative AI adoption. And it is significant. So we see that the issue around data is, from respondents, over 80% agreed that their organization is already flooded with data, but they don't know necessarily how to harness it for the purposes of generative AI to be able to generate value. Nearly 3/4 agreed that the volume of the data is overwhelming and it's constantly expanding. And this is true, across healthcare. We see that data, approximately 80% of data in healthcare is unstructured, which also makes it ripe for potential innovation, and how we can overcome some of those challenges. And of course, it increases constantly. So avoidance is not the answer. So we highly recommend this as a key starting area. And I know that this is something, Anita, that comes up with your customers as well as a critical pain point. Maybe you can share more about how you're approaching some of this with your customers.
Sure. Thanks, Ariel, for highlighting this, because it is top of mind for every client that we work with. You can say there is no AI without data. So these challenges, there's a good reason that these are forefront in people's minds. When we're working with clients, we have to go through everything that it takes to get to that safe path to AI. So, like we always have with analytics, we need to address all of the security and privacy rules and regulations and standards that every organization has. But in addition, you have to deal with things like bias. If there's bias in your data, there's a risk there's going to be bias in your AI. And so we also focus on accuracy, how to use sophisticated AI fine-tuning techniques to achieve accuracy and latency goals, and importantly, explainability, right? There are, concerns about where these answers have come from. So when we're, presenting an insight or an answer to an end user, we always want to be able to cite the source document that it came from. And then you mentioned that 80% of data is unstructured. Well, so we can bring AI to the data as well to help pre-process, organize, and in some cases extract out, structured elements that you need as part of your solution. But another way to think about it is every document that is being used within a payer organization. So just think about the contracts, the plan designs, the policies, the guidelines, the standard operating procedures. Ultimately, generative AI is going to let us treat that document world as data as well, and be able to act on what today is kind of locked up in all those documents.
Absolutely. And I know if you're seeing that with your customers, right? We're seeing it across the industry as well, right? Where more folks are able to, turn that, read images, be able to take, things like progress notes, right? That we otherwise may not have, been able to parse out things like social determinants of health, right? And other factors that would otherwise get lost, right, for these
Yeah.
members. And it's so incredibly exciting, to me, to think about that from a population health perspective, and what we can do to truly enrich our understanding of that member, that patient,
Right.
and how we can ensure we're taking the right action.
Right, and neither of us mentioned medical records, right? And we know, how critical medical records are in every stage of the healthcare process, and they can, run to the thousands of pages. So that's, where a lot of organizations have started, and certainly where there's a great deal more value yet to be gained.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and of course, we'll continue to learn more every day, right? As we all work with our customers, and certainly welcome other folks, to share how you're using generative AI in these different applications and the value that you've been able to unlock. And so, again, turning back to our data here, and what we heard from some of the respondents, we talked about the challenges. We also talked about how the challenges in generative AI and adoption could also exacerbate the situation. And so, what's really interesting is you see health insurers banking on generative AI, literally, right, to help solve these challenges, but also it brings up a whole host of other challenges, right, and barriers to overcome. And so, what's really interesting is we asked folks about this and thinking about the implications of if you fail to adopt generative AI, what challenges, might you face? And so we continue to hear from folks that if they fail to successfully implement, that it will lead to the potential of quality and risk management issues. It can complicate their ability to achieve their two most important goals that we talked about, right? The ability to improve the member experience, thinking about less effective customer data security and management. Again, critical issue for so many health insurers and providers, and thinking about cybersecurity. Another area where you also see this constant evolution of regulation. And again, at the state level, we're seeing more activity related to that cybersecurity and the use of data. So again, constant moving target that we're trying to stay out ahead of. And lastly, I want to call out one other important area here. It could lead to damaged member trust. And so member trust within health insurers candidly is already on the decline from our other data that we see at Forrester. And so again, where we see this focus from so many health insurers and how do I move from transactional to a more relationship-based approach in the way that I support my members, you can't afford candidly to lose any more trust from your members. And so there's this important element of how do we ensure that we're thoughtful and intentional in the way that we're using generative AI, but also transparent. And Anita, I love that you touched on this important element related to bias and hallucination, and thinking about some of the other common pitfalls that we see. There is also this understanding and fear that if that happens, it will also adversely affect the clinical outcomes for their members. And that is very much a real risk, right? And so you have to think about how do we ensure that this generative AI experience has been trained on the right data, complete data, that it doesn't have bias that's continuing to perpetuate, but also making sure that employees that are going to use this experience or use it for decision making can trust it. So that notion of explainable AI, again, becomes that much more important when we think about trust, both for members, but also for employees. And so we know that we have to shift from experimentation to implementation. We've noted some challenges, right, that folks continue to face, both writ large, but also specifically when it comes to generative AI. And so I want to share a little bit more here in terms of the learnings, where we have seen folks been able to progress, and what we heard from some of the respondents. So we know that last year, folks were excited, right? Generative AI was novel and new, and now it, has become much more commonplace as part of the conversation at the C-suite level and down. And what we continue to hear from folks is they move from experimentation to implementation. When you're using these types of technologies, what level of impact will it have, or has it had on your ability to achieve your key business goals? And so we wanted to understand this sort of transformative but also significant impact that it has been able to have. And what we're seeing is, we're at this critical juncture, right, for so many health insurers. Nearly half of respondents say that generative AI can transform the member experience for the better. 51% said this. And then 50% said that it can help them drive revenue or profit gains. Again, a key area when we think about some of the financial struggles that some folks are facing. And then lastly, I want to call out improving competitive differentiation. Another key area that we know is a key business goal, a business priority for so many health insurers in the coming year. And so this checks off a lot of boxes when we think about both the priorities, but also the challenges that folks are facing. And so again, it helps solidify the importance, but also the power that generative AI can help folks in being able to achieve those goals. And lastly, I want to call out, we've talked about some of the risks, yes, that can come with generative AI. We sometimes, will hear from folks this fear about security, right? And it can be, generative AI can be a double-edged sword. So it can both aid with security responses when we think about generative AI, but it can also create this new endpoint as we think about embedding it into more technologies. And so it also creates this risk for exploitation by bad actors. And so because of this, it's so incredibly important that folks are vigilant, they have the right safeguards in place when we think about expanding generative AI's reach, both initially in that experimentation phase, but also in the enterprise phase as you shift those use cases to a broader reach, or it starts to touch more of your data model, or you think about the dependency on it and your future. So for now, I just want to call out, the most important thing is to get started, is to experiment, but also do so deliberately, do so intentionally. We should not necessarily be leaving generative AI unsupervised in any mission critical workflows. Just want to call that out, that that's our viewpoint at Forrester, but we do want to make sure that it is, you're embracing it and embedding it intentionally within your workflows, that you have explainability, that you have traceability to the source data, and that you're clearly explaining why certain actions might be suggested as you're embedding it into the workflow. I know even, for my own day-to-day, right, how things looked last year versus this year, right, is a pretty stark contrast. And I'm sure other folks can relate to that as well, as it becomes more part of our day-to-day and our normal workflows. So with that, we've talked about this need to just get started. That can be overwhelming for some folks when you think about the challenges. The most critical area to start and to focus on is data management. So we know that, again, data has that power of making or breaking your strategy. We also saw that respondents understood this within the study. They understand the importance of shoring up their enterprise data management capabilities. That's a key starting point. 53% shared that with us. We also heard that identifying critical use cases that can help improve the member experience is also an element and a key focus. And then lastly, I want to call out employee training, right? That importance around things like data literacy, the understanding of generative AI, when and how you should use it, is incredibly important. And so, when I look at this, right, this is generative AI and the use by employees. Everyone is responsible for the responsible use of AI within an organization. And so it's important that we understand what tools we can and can't use, right? What data we can put into those tools. And it's certainly not an area where you beg forgiveness, right? It is a ask permission beforehand, have policies in place that help establish the rules of when and how you should be using generative AI. And knowing that this is an area that continues to evolve, it can be tricky for many organizations. Anita, I'm curious, how have you helped folks navigate some of this area around data?
Thanks, Ariel. And it is like such a critical area, as you've just laid out perfectly. What we're seeing, I'm seeing our clients being pragmatic now about operating at two speeds, meaning because of all of the market pressures we talked about, we do need to start to put AI into real production use, even while we're in parallel, beginning to plumb the depths of what its real capability will be, and how we can start to reimagine operations around the ways that we can use AI. So the data modernization efforts generally are getting started with a use case in mind, or more likely a whole family of use cases. So, recognizing that a number of these systems and data sources have been cultivated over the years with specific siloed business purposes, now they can be integrated and connected to create much more personalized and rich kind of end-to-end experiences for your members. So we've been, focused on helping our clients make those linkages across their own organization, and then start to undertake the data modernization programs that they need in order to enable their initial use cases. And I think just before we go on, Ariel, you were talking about trust earlier. And so I wanted to talk about that here as well, because even as you're working through your data modernization strategy, it's all typically within the context of a responsible AI program, right? It's not, so every step from the very beginning when you're identifying your data and you need to trace its lineage and ensure that the right security is around it, as it's moving through your data pipelines. And so, a company like EXL, we have our responsible AI initiatives with our AI Center of Excellence and the ethical AI framework. And that applies from the very beginning when you're looking at where is the data coming from and how is it going to be used, and making sure you're building in the right levels of security and transparency each step of the way. So it's not just about securing the data now, but perhaps securing the model, securing the application, and recognizing that at every level, we need to have that same robust security and privacy protection in place.
Absolutely. No, and I love that you connected that back to trust, right? And if we don't build things intentionally and from the ground up, right, with that keeping the data secure, and secure it means a number of different things, right? People can be our biggest risk sometimes. And so, again, that need for responsible use of AI, right, that sits at the individual level, but also, thinking about the data, right, and just how do we protect that, is such a critical element for both the strategy, but also, connecting back to your member trust. So I'm glad you raised that up. And this is what you just alluded to there. I think is important. As we embarked on this study, we also wanted to understand, when you think about the path to succeed, right, and some of the actions that you're taking to help your own customers at EXL, but also where we hear folks, who are they partnering with? What are the things that they're still challenged by? What are they looking for in a partner? As we dug into more of those questions and that data, we continue to see generative AI is not a go it alone for nearly all firms that we heard from within the study. And so specifically, we see for health insurers, they're trying to find a vendor that can help integrate well with their existing workflows. Again, we've already adopted many different technologies across the health insurance space. It's really about how does generative AI start to embed right within some of those different technologies. How do you look to some of your existing partners or reevaluate to make sure that you have a partner that is embarking on that path of thinking about how generative AI will influence that technology moving forward. And so we need that to prevent disruption. We need it to make sure that we're protecting data privacy, as you alluded to, Anita, and thinking about security. Two very different things, but related. And then, of course, making sure that someone has deep domain experience and expertise and can build the models that your employees can trust, that they can understand, and that we can also make sure that these can scale with their business moving forward. So what we heard from these leaders is that, we know that in terms of what's holding them back, they think about data management, they think about needing someone that can bring some of the technology to the table. What was interesting is that, despite this, we still continue to see folks looking to a consulting partner or an agency partner, compared to 46% calling out that they're looking for a critical enabler, like a data analytics partner or a technology integration partner. And so I want to call out that for this strategy, data is your, again, biggest make it or break it element of your strategy. And so it's so important that you have someone that can help you understand the value of that data, safeguard it, get the most out of it, and think about the long-term strategy. And so something that we want to highlight for folks here, think about the implications of who your partner is and making sure that it's setting you up for a long-term relationship and long-term strategy versus that quick win, right? The quick win that maybe solves one initial use case, but it can't scale across the enterprise. We have to think about, once we start to earn that trust, right, and deliver that value to the organization, how can we quickly harness that momentum and achieve enterprise scale? And that comes from finding a partner that can help embark on that long-term strategy. So as we clicked into that, we continue to see folks looking for partners that can help them, yes, accelerate and move quickly, but also do so responsibly, which I think is worth noting for folks. Um, it's a unique opportunity, right, where we continue to see that there's significant opportunity and value to be achieved, but there's also a lot of technicality when it comes to the technology, when it comes to data, when it comes to skills that we need to be able to do this effectively. And so we heard from respondents is that they want a partner that can bring these transformative capabilities, but they also understand how to mitigate some of the risks that we highlighted previously. We also know that folks want a world-class technical platform or tool that they can bring to bear. 46% shared that with us. And then from there, we know that the three next responses are more focused on implementation. And so I just want to call that out. There's a technology, and then folks are quickly then pivoting to think about the risk in the future of that implementation and ensuring that folks are brought in and bought in to that implementation. They recognize the importance of AI and data governance. They understand the importance of navigating some of the compliance and regulatory requirements. Again, an ever evolving landscape that has shown no signs of slowing down. And then lastly, another 29% want partners who can demonstrate their commitment to mitigating that risk, to emphasizing safety, and ensuring that they focus on security. And so I just want to emphasize some of these key elements that folks are looking for as they think about their partner. And so regardless of where you are in your strategy, as you think about your next stage of maturity and you're evaluating whether it's your existing partners or looking for a new partner, we want to call out that these elements, right, are all important as you think about that checklist of who that partner will be. And just know that this landscape is not slowing down anytime soon. And so certainly, we recommend as it continues to take shape, find someone who can go on the journey with you, keep you company, right, and be that advisor, but also that technology partner in this effort. And so with that, I'm going to hand things back to Anita to close us out here.
Yeah, so thanks, Ariel. Around the partners, just with everything you just went through, that tells us right there that this AI transformation is unlike any other that any of us in healthcare have been through, right? And we've been through a number. When we started using predictive analytics, when we started bringing clinical data together with administrative data, with the advent of electronic health records, 15 years ago, this goes even beyond that, right? When you think about the different skill sets and the different parts of your organization that really need to come together in order to, create your AI adoption plan. So the reason, that we hear from our payer clients that they want to work with EXL is because as a long-standing analytics and operations partner for them, we tend to understand their organizational setup, the workflows that they go through, and we get fairly intimate with the data that is supporting their business. And that's part of what really allows us to help them bridge the gap between their operations and data and technology teams. But it's certainly not just EXL. This takes a village. It requires collaboration inside the payer organization and outside. And we've been investing more and more in our own partnerships with the technology partners that are so critical to the AI agenda. So whether it's hyperscalers or our most recent relationship is with NVIDIA, where we're finding the technology platform that can help our clients to get to accelerated computing and fine-tuning their models for better accuracy and performance. And that's what we expect will continue to grow, that we'll have, each of our clients will have a set of partners that are key to really advancing their AI agenda, and it won't be just one, but it will be those that can bring the data modernization like EXL and the operational understanding that we have from working with that client, as well as the technology partners that are bringing, the very latest advancements in generative AI. So thank you. So we will now move into the Q&A session. And thank you to everyone that was so kind as to share their questions with us. We may have more than we will get through, Ariel. So I think perhaps I will take the first one, and then I'll let you pick the one you would like to answer next, if that works.
That sounds good.
Sound okay? All right. So I noticed that the people in the survey were both focused on improving member experience, but then also saying it was a major challenge for them this year. But how can generative AI help with that problem? It seems like it's too easy to believe that a bot can help you better connect to people, but that sounds fundamentally misguided. So yes, I do. There's a dichotomy there, and both are true, that our clients are recognizing a need to improve member experience, but finding that it's not that easy to do, right? Healthcare is complex. The policies, the benefits, the way that your financial obligation changes throughout the year, or depending on the network, the part of the provider network you're seeing, it is fairly complex. So trying to simplify that for people is part of what we see our clients doing, which does take some fundamental redesign in how you interact with your members, whether it's telephonically or through digital channels. And more there is a desire to move these interactions into digital, but only if they can be simplified so that the clear intent can be diagnosed up front, and a quick answer can be delivered. So where we're seeing success today, a couple of different ways of thinking about it. In certain use cases where there's a pretty straightforward interaction, we've seen what we call a containment rate up to 80%. And we are finding that repeat callers are choosing to use the automated response, which tells us that they're getting their answers faster and more accurately, than when they're going through a phone call. Other ways AI is being used now to support members is with the advocates themselves who are in the member contact centers. And there we're able to bring data to perhaps predict what the next interaction might be for that member, and through like a next best action kind of program, be able to give the advocate some insight into what else they could offer to that member while they're speaking with them. And in that way, try to help the member along the journey that they're on, and give them some kind of insight or guidance that they might otherwise in the past have had to call back for. So that's where we see the data, the integration of data from multiple parts of your plan operation, and the interaction with the member kind of coming together to create a better experience for them. So, but as you can say, even as I'm trying to explain it, it is challenging. It takes a bit of work and design to get these in place. But some of our clients have a vision that those member services interactions can become, almost care support interactions over time as we bring more and more insights into that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Anita, I would just add, to that before we jump into our next question, when we look at the customer experience within health insurance and we look at that index, hybrid experiences are still the top performing, right? And so, yes, you still have the vast majority of folks that are picking up the phone when they have a question, right, and reaching out to that health insurer. One, folks are going to continue to do that. And so, that still is a channel that is, effective and they're going to continue to use. it's where you can find the efficiency and be able to build that relationship, right, that you're describing is empowering those employees, right? And so that's where we see that connection between this is where your customers are. How do you continue to meet them here, but also bring efficiency to that experience and to that conversation? So I think that's I love that and love hearing about the work with advocates, certainly. So I'm going to jump to our next question. And so from our audience, do we see generative AI to be member facing in voice and chat channels, or just back end processing and data analytics? Which I think is a very interesting question. And so we alluded to some of this, right? And the fact that, generative AI, today we don't see it, being unleashed as much, on that member facing experience. That said, we are headed in that direction. So when I think about some of the various platforms that we've evaluated at Forrester, for instance, so looking at sex platforms specifically, we do see folks working towards embedding more large language models into the back end within some of those experiences. So shifting from sort of simplistic, conversational AI technologies to more robust things that can start to, take on more complex use cases. That said, we're not there yet. And it's going to take a lot of best practices that we touched on during the conversation today, right? The ability to ensure that we are explaining the source of that information, where it came from. How do you give folks, a sense of how it reasoned, to get to that end state and that endpoint? There are use cases where it's appropriate, right, and safe to be able to use those technologies, and others where it's not. And we think about some of the clinical setting, right? We, are not necessarily going to replace the workforce, right, with generative AI, but the workforce that does not embrace generative AI or AI writ large, does risk being replaced. And so it's important that we find ways of being able to work with it and thinking about how we support these member-facing applications, whether it is in a more conversational format that the member can interact with directly. Again, not there yet, but we're getting there. Or it is supporting the contact center agent or a care advocate to be able to get to a faster resolution. Absolutely. And then, of course, on the data analytics piece, we have vast amounts of data that we can't tap into or previously not been able to tap into with this incomplete picture of the member. Social determinants of health contribute to a significant amount of risk for the individual. If they can't afford their medication, can't get transportation to their appointment, then we're not going to see the outcomes that we hope for and need, candidly, right, within Medicare Advantage and other lines of business. So it plays a role across all areas, but we're at different levels of maturity, is how I would answer that question. And Anita, I'm curious if there are other things that you would add.
No, I think you described what I hear from the clients every day. So I think you covered that very well, Ariel. And I agree with you that it's not quite there yet, that we're putting generative AI unfettered in front of our members. But the opportunity to give them faster, more targeted responses is there. It's going to take some time, but I think we're going to get there.
Wonderful.
So, all right, so maybe let me pick up another question here, and maybe, Ariel, we can both try to answer this one. I'm seeing when you say that it's time to move past experimentation, what are some of the first focus areas we should be planning for? And so I think, we would probably both say data modernization to enable some of these AI use cases is definitely going to be effort that is, well worth the time and will pay off as the AI technologies continue to mature and evolve. I would also say that there are, some kind of no regret areas where you can bring it in so that it's, really helping helping the quality and, maybe elevating the performance in various parts of your operation. So, for example, most organizations do a large variety of quality audits for either for clinical review or for compliance with regulations. And typically those audits are done with a little bit of technical support, but they can't be done for more than a single digit sample of the cases or calls that are being audited. Whereas with this Gen AI technology, you really can bring in a cost effective platform for doing 100% auditing. And then you can start to use that for identifying retraining opportunities or gaps in your policies when you're able to audit a 100% sample. Other areas, of course, are in documentation and in pre-processing the policies or guidelines or medical records that your various staff may need to, typically consult with in order to achieve, what they're doing, be it a clinical review, a claims review, understanding a potential appeal, whatever it might be. And these can greatly improve the efficiency of your people and also give them a little bit more reward in the way that they're working. So they spend a bit more time thinking through their clinical judgment, say, rather than hunting around for the pieces of information that they need to do their jobs. So those are some areas where our clients are seeing some good benefit. I'm sure, Ariel, in your experience talking to clients, you probably have some other areas you'd suggest.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't overemphasize enough data. And so data management, right? Getting your data house in order, but also just candidly understanding where it is, where it lives, where is it going to go, right? All the inner workings, right, of that data. And so what Anita just described, I think, is such a critical element. The other thing that I would call out is, in conjunction with that, and it's somewhat more process oriented, but it's getting your policies in order, right? And just making sure that folks understand how and when can I use generative AI? What tools should I use? How can I use them, right? How do you put up some of the safeguards that, again, think about supporting the security and privacy, right? That are also critical goals for so many healthcare organizations in the coming year. We've likely all seen the headlines of some of the physicians that are starting to use, more open source generative AI tools for clinical care, whether it is for summarization, it is to get a second opinion on some of the medication interferences, for instance. I look at that and it's a little scary. And so, how do you help ensure that you put the safeguards in place to help folks know what happens if you put personal information into an open tool, for instance? And we won't name those tools, but it's so important to understand the implications of how that data is used for training, for future purposes, the security of it, again, and making sure that folks understand the implications of responsible use. I also think that helps folks understand the connection and the ability to embed it within their workflow, right? You're not saying, no, don't use it, right? But here's how you can use it, and helping folks start that change management process, because a lot of this is change management and changing their workflow, changing their day-to-day. And so the faster you can find those folks that embrace it, right, the faster you'll find those operational efficiencies, but also ensure that you don't raise the risk that we see as a result of adopting those technologies. All right, I'm going to go to, I think, our last question here quickly. And we may not necessarily have a full answer for you here, but it's a big question. So how do you determine the appropriate budget to invest? And I will assume this is in the context of generative AI. And so again, I'm going to call it, we won't be able to answer that. It's going to be an organization level. But what I will call out is we've seen a number of folks that have shifted their budgets from traditional AI into generative AI. And I think there's an important element there to make sure you're balancing what is the most appropriate use, right, of whether it's generative AI or it's AI. They are not, the same. Machine learning, there's so many different elements, right, of AI. I think understanding the different elements, the values of the different technologies, and the appropriate use cases and applications, and the value it can deliver for both your business and the business outcomes, but also the customer outcomes that you're trying to attain. And so in any business case, right, it's incredibly important to understand both elements, and what is the potential cost, yes, but also the value, right? And when are you going to see that value? And so when you think about what you're going to invest that has a time horizon on it, it will look different across different organizations, but certainly starting to understand what are the most critical business challenges that you face that are appropriate for the application of generative AI. How can I apply them, and what's the value that I expect in return? And starting to talk to various folks and vendors in the space to start understanding those costs, I think is a critical first step. Anita, what would you add?
I was hoping you were going to come out with, 30% of your IT budget,
I know,
but
right?
you gave a
Wouldn't that
much
be nice?
more wise and measured response. So, I think you've hit on it. I think, something, maybe I'll add something we've seen ourselves in, working with this technology the last 18 months is there's a steeper learning curve, say, than when you're taking on a new software package. So some of our investment is in really validating the art of the possible in bringing our teams up to speed, for them to be able to engage and innovate and really push the boundaries of what they can get from the LLMs that they're working with. And so that's going to be part of your investment strategy, I think. That might be the only thing I'd add. But thanks for the good advice, Ariel. And I think we're about wrapped up. So I can just thank you, Ariel. Thank you to Forrester and Beckers, and to everyone that participated.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you both, Ariel and Anita. This has been an amazing presentation. And we also want to give a shout out to EXL for sponsoring today's webinar. If you want to learn more about the content presented today, please check out the resources section on your webinar console and make sure to fill out that post-webinar survey. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.